Oh god, I really hope this isn't true, but knowing Square Enix, I also wouldn't really be surprised. One of the games that I'm most looking forward to is, of course, Final Fantasy VII Remake. The original Final Fantasy VII was one of those games that made my childhood. Love this game from beginning to end, and I think a lot of people can say the same. Which is why when Sony announced that a Final Fantasy VII Remake was in the works all the way back in E3 2015, the sheer excitement among Final Fantasy fans was palpable. But fast forward to almost 3 years now, and we haven't heard much about the current state of the game, and turns out that a reason for this might be that the game's development is not doing so hot. The following information comes from a Reset Era post that highlighted information provided by a Reddit user named Dan Tsukasa, a 3D artist working in Japan who is seemingly familiar with the development of Final Fantasy VII Remake. In a Reddit thread discussing a recent interview with Final Fantasy VII Remake's art and visual effects director, Dan Tsukasa answered a number of questions regarding the state of the game's development. Here are some of the highlights. When one Reddit user talked about Tetsuya Nomura, Dan replied by stating that Nomura is barely there and that he's director largely in name alone due to the fact that most of his time is spent working on Kingdom Hearts 3 in Osaka. In another statement, Dan talked about how while the game has technically been in development for about 4 years, the amount of work that got done is actually closer to 2 years due to the fact that when development was taken off of CyberConnect 2's hands and moved internally to Square Enix, all the work that CyberConnect 2 did was pretty much scrapped because it was so useless and not far enough along. In case you aren't aware of what he's talking about, when development on Final Fantasy VII Remake began, Square Enix partnered with CyberConnect 2 to help them with the action gameplay and visual quality. But then back in May 2017, it was revealed that this partnership came to an abrupt end, with one of the Square Enix developers, Naoki Hamaguchi, addressing the situation by calling it a sensitive subject and by stating the following: "I've taken over the development side of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Up until now, development has progressed by receiving external collaboration, but from here on out, with production and quality in mind, we're shifting to our in-house organization. This company decision was made wanting to control quality as well as keeping the schedule stable." If Dan is to be believed, it seems as though this sudden shift hampered the game's development a lot more extensively than Square Enix is letting on. Apparently, things were bad enough that it was deemed faster to remake everything that CyberConnect 2 was working on rather than repurpose their work, as it was all seemingly in pretty bad shape. Dan also added, quote, "I'll explain it this way. When has a company taking work away from another company ever been a positive sign of things? I know CyberConnect's work was unusable. I've worked with them before. I know their level. And I know they outsourced to hell and back in order to get things to the point we saw them publicly, and it still wasn't enough to save them. I'm not speculating though. I've worked with these people and know people working still at both Square and CC2. I'm explaining what happened from what I know." Dan didn't rule out, however, that the game could be far along, stating, quote, "That said, it could be far along. It depends on how much they're outsourcing and how optimized their workflow is. As the Final Fantasy 15 workflow was super inefficient for a hell of a long time, if that's improved and if they're doing things modularly like I imagine, then it's certainly possible they're far along with the first release." Finally, he concluded by reiterating that he is in fact someone who works in Japan's gaming industry and is familiar with Square Enix, CyberConnect 2, and some of their developers, though for the purposes of anonymity, he couldn't delve into specifics. Now, what's interesting is that shortly after Dan made these Reddit posts, he proceeded to delete them, his Reddit account, as well as his Twitter account. It's almost as if he got tracked down and maybe got into a bit of trouble, requiring him to take everything down. The Reset Era user who compiled Dan's Reddit responses also noted that when his Twitter account was still active, he was being followed by the likes of ex-Final Fantasy XV lead designer Juan Hasmer, further lending credence to the possibility that he does in fact know what he's talking about. Now, it is important to recognize that this information should first and foremost be seen as rumor and speculation. Take all this with a grain of salt. But at the same time, nothing that Dan claims seems all that nonsensical. After all, we haven't really heard much from Final Fantasy VII Remake's developers for a very long time, and it's certainly strange that Square Enix ended their partnership with CyberConnect 2 out of the blue before proceeding to develop Final Fantasy VII Remake in-house, all while calling this a sensitive subject. Not to mention that Square Enix is no stranger to troubled development cycles, as noted by games like Final Fantasy XV, or Versus 13 as it was originally known, which was so inefficiently developed that it took well over a decade to finally be completed. Games like Kingdom Hearts 3 have also been in development for far too long, though it does finally seem to be taking shape for a 2018 release. It's really not all that impossible to imagine that Final Fantasy VII Remake might be having its fair share of development issues and inefficiencies, considering Square Enix's past history, as much as I would like to believe otherwise. In other words, the highly anticipated title's release window could be much further away than we think, despite the fact that it's been almost 3 years since announcement. So if we don't end up seeing it at E3 2018 in some form, or if we end up not hearing much about it in the coming year or two, don't be too surprised. Now, it is worth noting that Square Enix did eventually get over the hurdles of Final Fantasy XV's troubled development and shipped an adequately high-quality product. Furthermore, despite how long Kingdom Hearts 3 has been in development, it does seem as though the game will finally launch this year, and it's looking pretty damn good. So despite the troubles that Final Fantasy VII Remake's development may be undergoing, I am cautiously optimistic and hopeful that they'll be able to pull it together in the end. Though that doesn't make the situation any less unfortunate or frustrating. I don't know why Square Enix insists on announcing games way earlier than they should be, before they've got a solid groundwork prepared for their ambitious projects. All that does is just make the extended wait all the more excruciating and worrisome. This is all especially concerning when you consider that Final Fantasy VII Remake is meant to be comprised of multiple full-sized games, which makes one wonder how much downtime there will be between each one of them. There's a lot at stake with their decision to remake such an iconic video game, so I'm really crossing my fingers that they make a strong comeback from this, kick development into full gear in a more efficient fashion, and show us sooner rather than later that the game is shaping up to be a product that will meet our high expectations and will release its various entries in a timely manner. It would be devastating to see such an exciting project crumble under its own weight, which is the impression that a lot of people are understandably getting. So Square Enix, please pull your shit together, learn from the inefficiencies of past projects, and just make this good. We need this to be good. With that, I would like to end this news update. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoy my content, consider supporting me on Patreon. It is completely optional, but donating even as little as $1 a month will go a long way in helping maintain this channel. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out.